Poised for Exit is a show for business owners who want to achieve a successful exit based on their own terms. Your business exit will likely be the biggest financial transaction of your life, and for most, you'll have one shot at doing it right. The topics and guests we feature and the stories they share will provide valuable ideas and strategies to improve operations and grow enterprise value so you can achieve the best possible exit outcome. Now here's your host, award-winning certified exit planning advisor, Julie Keys.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Poised for Exit Planning podcast show. Today, we have a guest in the studio who is a co-founder of a firm that conducts private investigations and whose clients are professional deal makers, private business owners, and professional services firms. We are going to hear some interesting stories from him, but first, let's hear from our show sponsors.
Right now, there's a record number of buyers looking for businesses, and many businesses are selling at a premium. To get a free, confidential business valuation so you'll know what your business might be worth, contact a broker at Sunbelt Business Advisors at 612-455-0880. We're Minnesota's largest seller of companies. Let us help you maximize your life's work. Call 612-455-0880 or visit sunbeltmidwest.com.
Are you looking to add enterprise value to your business through effective marketing? At Evolve Systems, we craft custom marketing strategies designed to achieve your goals. Our comprehensive approach covers everything from branding and digital awareness to advanced lead generation tools. Positioning a business to sell in today's M&A market is not only challenging, but can be difficult without the right marketing strategy. We capture your ideal audience with clear and effective brand messaging that drives more deal customers. Let's evolve your business together. Reach out to us at 651-628-4000 or visit evolve-systems.com to start the conversation today.
Selling your business may be the furthest thing from your mind, but that doesn't mean you should wait to plan. At TrustPoint, we understand the nuances that come with selling a business and are here to guide you. From unlocking tax efficiencies to minimizing risk, we'll develop the strategies to ensure you're prepared. So, when the time arrives, you'll be ready to enjoy the best years of your life. Learn more at trustpointinc.com. That's TrustPointinc.com.
Hello, Poised for Exit listeners. Mark your calendars for the 7th Annual Owners Forum, hosted by the Twin Cities chapter of the Exit Planning Institute, to be held at Midland Hills Country Club on Thursday, October 3rd, 2 to 6 p.m., with all the best exit planning content, interaction, and networking you've come to expect from this popular event for business owners. Check the Poised for Exit show notes for more information and a link to register.
Hello, Poised for Exit listeners. We're here today with Tom Jaeb, who is the co-founder and managing director of J2 Risk Advisors. Tom, welcome to Poised for Exit.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah.
This is a great topic, and I'm sure that with the world we live in, that the work that you're doing has become more and more prevalent, and you probably have your phone ringing off the hook.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So, question of the day.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get into this work as a private investigator? So
Well,
interesting.
Yeah, it's a great question, and nobody really, starts their career goes to college and says, I want to be a private investigator.
Right.
I started actually in 1993. My brother had taken a job as an investigator with Equifax, the credit bureau.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
he's about 8 years older than me. And he just answered an ad. He thought, what an interesting job. Worked there for a couple of years, and then he branched off and started his own firm, which was called Heartland Investigative Group. I jumped on in 1993, and just to, that's obviously 31 years ago, so no internet. I would drive. My first job was to drive to every courthouse in the cities each day to run, criminal record searches, things like that, go to the Secretary of State.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then the internet hit, and I'm like, boy, there's something here. These databases started to come together where they were aggregating information from around the country. And I knew that that was a good opportunity. That was a much larger firm than J2. So we had about 80 employees with our security arm. And as I continued working there, I eventually became president, ran the operations. My brother was more of the sales and marketing,
Sure.
rainmaker guy. And we sold that in 2015. I stayed on with an industry buyer for about 4 years. Took about a 1-year hiatus for non-solicit, non-compete, and formed J2 again with my brother Paul. And we're much more focused now on more research-based things, right? So due diligence, backgrounds, asset searches, locating people, any type of work there. And then we contract out for our clients when they need something that, is more of a field work or something like that. But yeah, I don't think there was a single person that worked for me that ever thought that that's where they were going to land.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so would you say now that you're more, that you've got J2, are you guys more M&A based then?
Mm-hmm.
You are. Okay. Yeah. So before it was anything.
Pretty much anything.
Sure.
I mean, there was a stretch where we did a lot of family law stuff, which gets a little dicey,
Yes.
and not for everybody. But I'm much more focused on this now, and the tools we have that we've invested in are more designed for, lenders, investors, family offices, M&A professionals, deal makers,
right?
Buyers and sellers.
All the deal makers.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's becoming more and more prevalent. And so
it is.
So let's talk about like what a typical situation looks like, the work that you do, like the scope, things like that.
Yeah, I would say, a typical request would likely come from, let's just say, a private equity firm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this would be, we've got a deal closing in a couple weeks. We want you to do your normal, background on these 4 individuals that are the primary principals. Here's what we typically want to know. If any major red flags come up, tell us right away. Otherwise, send us a report. We'll pay you at closing, etc.
Got it.
Lenders can be similar as well. Typically, what we're looking at are, I think, what people would consider to be adverse findings, right? So
Sure.
think of, bankruptcies, lawsuits, liens, judgments, criminal records. And then we can also dig deeper to validate certain things, right?
Sure.
Is it important that they really got that college degree? Is it important that their professional license is verified?
Mm-hmm.
Social media for some clients, depending on circumstances, they might want to know if something's like really unusual or maybe inflammatory commentary that might not align with their culture.
Sure.
And it kind of goes on from there.
Mm-hmm.
Corporate affiliations, some clients will even want a credit report if it's plausible and legal to pull it in that scenario.
So you guys pull credit too?
We can.
Sure.
Yeah. It requires a signed release, which some clients don't want to ask for, but
Mm-hmm.
if they do, we can do it.
And just because they say that they went to MIT doesn't mean they actually did.
Yeah, you'd be shocked. I mean, really, it still blows my mind that some people
Really?
do that. Yep. And it's just nothing. It's
Gosh.
not even like, some of them, they didn't even go there at all.
Wow.
A lot of times what you see, though, is you can phrase things in a certain way. Like on your LinkedIn, under education, you can just put the college, right? Some people put the college. They don't say what they got or when they graduated, so it's inferred
Yes.
that they got a degree, but really they might have gone there for 2 years and
And never finished
and
or
never
anything.
finished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which,
Right.
not necessarily a lie or a major red flag, but it's
Yeah.
kind of a unique discrepancy.
What are some of the other things that you discover when you're checking different companies out or people out? I'm sure there's a mix of both.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it could even be that an individual spouse was wrapped up in something extremely negative or significant, and that could have a bearing, right? They could have maybe a role in the company, less defined, or,
Sure.
obviously could be technically some kind of a shareholder, but they didn't ask us to background them specifically.
Mm.
Otherwise, I think a lot of it would just be reputational things.
Sure.
I mentioned social media earlier, and that can, there's so many platforms now that it's becoming a challenge for us to search everything within a reasonable budget. I mean,
Wow. Yeah. I bet that it would be.
and again, to show my age, when I started, it was MySpace, and I'm not kidding you.
Oh, I believe you.
Which was great because there was no privacy. You couldn't lock it down.
Right.
So people never thought that somebody would look at
Mm-hmm.
somebody like me would look at their profile. So that was kind of gold for a while.
Can you still find any information on MySpace? Does it still exist? I don't
still
even
exists.
know. Seriously, it
Yeah.
still does.
Every
Wow.
once in a while I see someone and I'm like, wow, that is weird. Now, most of the time it's, hasn't been updated in, 8 years or something, but it's out there. Yeah.
Goodness
Social media
sakes.
is interesting, and it's hard to explain how many different weird things that we find. And sometimes the clients, it's up to them. We customize our solution. So some of them are like, all I want to know is X, Y, and Z. I don't care where they lived or what their house is worth or whatever. I don't care about divorces. I don't care about this, And
Mhm.
so you just try to work within that framework and give them their findings.
Sure. as far as checking out the company,
Mm-hmm.
not just the people, but the company, right? So you talked about the reputation. You're probably looking into their credibility and credit as well, right? So you pull Dun and Bradstreet
Yeah.
reports too, or
Yeah, Dun and Bradstreet, and there's a couple other variations
Mhm.
of that out
Sure.
there, different companies that specialize
yeah,
in different industries. So I
Mhm.
think maybe it's Experian is better for like trades and, those types of companies
Sure.
versus D&B. So we'll pull that. We also look at, where are they incorporated? Where are the offices? Do they have subsidiaries or, parent
Mhm.
companies, sister companies that they may not be aware of? Normally
Right.
they are, but sometimes if it's maybe less experienced,
yeah,
buyers or sellers, they might not think of that and get a big org chart or a chart like that. So again, same thing.
Sure.
In general, reputation, adverse findings, bad press, sometimes even bad reviews, right? Like if it's a consumer-facing business, we
Right.
might look at Yelp and Google reviews and
That-
get
that-
into that piece of it.
yeah. That's what I was wondering because
Mhm.
there's a lot of different places now that people can leave reviews. Glassdoor is another one.
Yeah.
Right, about what it's like to work there as an
Yeah.
employee, right? That's kind of
Yeah.
important too. So
Yeah.
what are some of the pitfalls that, you run into that you see?
I would say the first one probably would be clients that don't understand that it's customizable. So
Mm.
they'll say, well, I was told to order a civil and criminal record search from you
Sure.
for this deal. And I'll say, okay, well, here's several more options. There's different scope. What if the person's international? How do you want to deal with that? Another pitfall, which is rare, is that some clients will want me to check somebody out very early in the process. So they're not even ready to maybe even approach them. So they have limited information. And it could be like, well, it's John Smith and he's in New York City,
Oh, sure.
and he works for some large company. And I'm like, okay, well, there's like 7 of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And unless
You
I have
really
something
want to spend your
validate-
money on this?
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Um, And there's some other pitfalls I can get into on some of the future questions. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, the way it works today, it's a lot easier than it was 30 years ago to identify a person, right? So
Right.
you could give me very disparate information, and I'm likely going to find who that person is. And then once I tag them, I'm going to get, date of birth and partial social security number, enough of a foundation where then we can just run with it.
Mm.
But, 25 years ago, the databases just weren't as powerful.
Mm-hmm.
If you couldn't get your hands on a credit report, you were pretty reliant on the client, to provide accurate data.
Sure.
But now we can take care of that.
Well, and what we said, like we said before earlier in the show, that you're primarily working in M&A situations, obviously buyers and sellers,
Mhm.
right? So, what are some of the proactive things that buyers and sellers can do, right, to set themselves up for success in these investigations?
That is a great question. So one of the things that we've developed over the years, and this works very well for M&A deals and private equity versus, let's say, a bank.
Mm-hmm.
We have developed a questionnaire that let's just say in this case, it's the seller or the principals of the company that we're checking out that they can complete. So it acts as a release form in case we need it, but it also asks any number of questions that the client would like to ask. So obviously it's, name, rank, and serial number, address history, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But then it goes into, hey, what are you a shareholder of any other company? Do you have any officer or directorships? Have you filed bankruptcy? Have you been sued? Do you have a criminal record? What's your education? What are your professional licenses? And the beauty of that is, number one, we get a lot more information up front that helps us speed up the process. But then we get to compare and contrast our findings with what they disclosed, which is a big deal to a lot of clients.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you got sued,
Yeah.
but to lie about it is a
Right.
whole different thing. Or
Right.
to omit it, right? And it does happen pretty often.
I bet
be
it
honest.
does. Yeah.
Some
They
of
don't want
them are-
anybody to know. Or,
Yeah. And some of them are, benign.
Sure.
Like, oh, I forgot that 20 years ago I had a disorderly conduct in college or something like that.
Sure.
But a lot of them are, bigger lawsuits. And then
Sure.
they'll come back and say, well, it's settled, so I didn't think it was a big deal. But that's a very powerful tool. It adds a ton of value to the process at no additional cost.
So, who's actually presenting this questionnaire, you or your client?
Yeah, so the client will let them know that it's coming. And then we have a platform that we created. It's a secure online, think of like Adobe Sign, things like that, where we actually will email the principals with an introductory email. We'll say, look for this link. You can securely, complete the form and digitally sign it. And you can even attach documents. Some clients want to see like a copy of a driver's license or something to validate, help validate identity. And they complete it. We get alerted. It's usually a 1 or 2 day process, depending on how they do it. And then we have a separate questionnaire for companies, which is also very helpful. Subsidiaries, locations,
right,
ownership structure, again, liens, judgments, criminal, all that kind of stuff.
And the bigger the company and the more involved the owners are, there's a lot more work for you to do then.
Correct.
So what kind of stories have you got to share with us, Tom?
Well, this one's a little unique, and the reason I'm bringing it up is just because it literally just happened. So we had a client that essentially was invested in portfolios of different mortgages, which is common, and at some point they learned that there was this giant list of these borrowers that were supposed to be scrubbed for what we call like watch list and sanctions. And if you've heard of like the anti-money laundering and the know your customer laws. And so we get this list of maybe 2,000 names, and it's retroactive. And so we had, a couple months to get it done. And it was a good kind of test because you got 2,000 names and we got 2 hits, but they were really, really major things, right? So this one gal, and I still couldn't believe it was her because she had a relatively common name. So we had to really dig in to make sure it was the right person, but it was. She had been running these brothels in the state where she was living, and she bribed a Homeland Security official to try to assist her with her business. And he was undercover. So it's a federal court criminal indictment. I think she did probably 2 years in federal prison and was back out. And what also happened in that case was the client had come back and say, okay, we're going to have to deal with this. She's, one person in the portfolio. We're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. Oh, by the way, could you figure out what her citizenship status is? Because some documents say she's, a Chinese national. Other ones say she's a U.S. citizen. Well, it turns out as I read through the complaint further, the reason she bribed the Homeland Security official was because she wanted his help to get her citizenship because she had failed the test twice. So it's just kind of an interesting way, that all that stuff came together. It turns out she was also bribing local police for protection to run her business.
Wow.
But yeah, it's sort of like that's a good kind of rule of thumb. I mean, that was basically what a 2% of the names had a hit, right? Actually less than that, 2 out of 2,000. So whatever, 0.2 or whatever.
So what happened to her? Is she only 2 years in federal prison? Did she get deported then, or what happened?
No.
What?
Yeah, that's... And
she's back in business somewhere.
Yeah.
You know it.
Nuts.
You know it.
Yep. Because I looked it up. I thought, well, geez, maybe she still was paying the mortgage, but she's out of the country, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem to be the case.
Right. So she was one of the mortgagors, and then there was another one that you said. What was that story all about?
He was currently under indictment for federal financial crimes. I can't remember if it was like wire fraud or bribery or something like that, but his clock was ticking. He was coming up for trial probably in a few months. So he will be going to federal prison for sure.
Goodness.
Yeah. And you don't know if you don't check. And again, it's that, I tell my clients a lot, especially in the PE space, it's really probably 1 to 2% of the requests that I get would be that my findings would turn out to be a deal breaker. Right.
Got it. That was my next question. Like how many of them actually break up the deal? Okay.
Probably 1 to 2%, but those are very significant. I'd say we're in probably a 10% range where there's a finding that's significant enough that they need to go back and have a discussion, right? Whether it was disclosed or not, usually when it's not disclosed or they were not asked to disclose anything. And I'd say probably 15%, have something. But then we try to help the clients too with like, what, this looks to be isolated. Yes, it's a federal tax lien, but it's from 8 years ago.
Yeah.
It's fully paid off and there's no pattern here. that's what we tend to look for.
Got to look for the patterns.
Yeah.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So going back to the mortgage portfolio client, what prompted them in the first place to have you look into the borrowers?
I think as these transactions were happening and new people were becoming involved, there was a lot of different, one was kind of a fund, one was the company that
Sure.
sort of ran that asset, and there was
Right.
different players involved. Somebody along the way said, I think we were supposed to do this, and we didn't. So let's fix it, and we'll
Got
do
it.
it on a go forward now when the deal is happening versus
Sure.
retroactively.
Well, some of the new requirements for the Corporate Transparency Act may help with that, right? With the filing of all these shell LLCs, and you don't really know who owns what.
Yeah.
And we had Scott Seiler on the show a few weeks ago to talk about the CTA and the requirements for small businesses getting their filing done before the end of the year.
And it's so funny because I
Yeah.
know Scott very well. I think
Sure.
we've been friends for probably 20 years.
Awesome.
And I actually considered calling him because I got a letter just for my small business about beneficial ownership
Yeah.
reporting. And
Yep.
I'm like, I think I do have to report this.
Yeah.
I don't think I have an exemption of any kind here.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm scared,
Right.
or anything like that. But I did think that was a really good sign. I must have had 50 people call me in the last 10 years asking, can you help figure out, beneficial ownership information on companies, especially if they're foreign. And I'm like, there's really nothing out there that's a one-stop shop for that.
Sure.
It just doesn't exist.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So this is a really good thing that we're putting together, even though it's a hassle for business owners to
I
get
think so.
this
I just
done.
wish
Yeah.
I could get access to it, but
Yeah.
I don't think I would be able to.
Sure. Well,
It's probably not going to be public record. So
I guess my biggest fear with it is that there'll be owners out there who don't get it done because they're not aware of it or that they're required to do it, and then they're going to end up with these huge penalties. So
yeah, I was looking through that, and that was more substantial than I anticipated.
quite a bit. Yeah. So tell us about one more story before we wrap up. A client story that turned out to be successful, like, not necessarily no red flags, but like, how did you put it all together? And, you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I'd kind of like to have our clients understand how important it is for them to the ones that are in the space that need someone like you to actually work with someone like you.
Yeah, I would say in a lot of these cases, we do find what some people would consider to be adverse information. And we kind of pride ourselves on taking a little bit of an extra step in providing a little more analysis and recommendations. And a lot of people in my space are scared to do that. They think that we're giving advice or legal advice. I'm like, we're not. All I'm saying is I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen situations like this before, and we're just making commentaries such as, okay, that, tax lien was isolated.
Yeah.
But on this one, there's 6 DUIs that span, 20
Sure.
years.
There's a
right?
pattern.
There's a pattern, right?
Yeah.
Or they file bankruptcy every 10 years like clockwork as soon as they can legally do it again. And also, I think there's also a little bit of a misconception that, we're out there to dig up dirt and, find whatever we can and, crush deals and all that. A lot of what we do is validating what's good.
Of course.
And so that 99% that sort of
Yeah.
pass, it's an extra little badge, it's a validation that, yeah, everything you told us was great. You seem great. And that's good, right?
Yes.
Versus somebody saying, well, what am I paying for? I mean, you guys never find anything. It's like, well, that's not always the point.
Right. Isn't that what you want? We want to make
Yeah,
the deal, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I love the fact that you're taking the next step and just giving your perspective on what you find, right? Because so many people can analyze something, go the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And I think that, to your point about patterns, that really does kind of tell a story, doesn't it?
Yeah. And if I've got just another minute, one exciting thing, this is kind of a newer trend, is there's a lot more tools out there now to do what I would call ongoing monitoring. And this would be very helpful, especially to, some private equity deals, but usually after like a 2-year earnout, they're not necessarily as interested. They might have moved on and exited it. But for banks and especially, asset-based lenders, factoring companies that have longer term engagements, these monitoring tools allow us to sort of keep an eye on the individuals that we already backgrounded for a period of time without having to go back and redo the background check every 6 months or every year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I would say you should be the first to know, not the last to know, especially if it's, an ABL or factoring deal and something starts to pop up that could supersede your position in terms of the collateral. So the tools have made it so that it's more efficient and it's less expensive. Before it was, I basically have to redo this.
Sure.
There's only so many things that, that remain the same. Otherwise,
Sure.
I always tell people a background check is as good as the day it was done.
Exactly.
So you could have an employee working for you for 20 years. Well, the background check is 20 years old if you did it.
Right.
So that's an exciting thing, and we're starting to get some traction there as well.
Wow, this has been great.
Yeah.
Tom, thank you so much.
Of course.
For,
it's always fun to talk shop with another
being on the
professional.
show.
So,
And our listeners are the people that you want to get in front of and that want to get in front of you, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And so we will definitely be highlighting you in social media and in the show notes.
It.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us again on the Poised for Exit podcast show. Please join us again next time.